My name is Sandrine Dixson-Declève. And how do we move from the incredible calls that we had on gender to the presentation that we just had from the finance minister into circularity? You're probably wondering, should I have stayed? Let me make a couple of comments, because my career has spanned 30 years of working in the area of energy, climate, and sustainability. And yesterday, you were basically told that your house was on fire by the UNFCCC. I am now the president of the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome has been in existence for the last 50 years. I'm 53, so actually I feel that I embody the feelings of the club. And what does the Club of Rome say? The Club of Rome came out with a very important report called The Limits to Growth, which indicated that actually already in 1968, all the things we are talking about, linear systems, only focusing on growth and consumption, were totally wrong. And if you look at actually speeches by Bob Kennedy in 1968, he was already talking about new indicators to growth. So the issue of circularity is inextricably linked to the issue of growth and consumption. And what is the importance of women? Yesterday we launched with an organization that I actually have called We Can, bringing women in decision-making. We are coming into the EU elections, and we can talk about the issues that we see across the globe, but even in Europe we don't have enough women in decision-making. And the only way that we're going to actually shift our growth spectrum is to ensure that we gender-proof growth, that we bring more women into decision-making and more women into the economic system. And then the final point, linked to the minister. How are we going to finance all of this? Absolutely fundamental that we look at sustainable finance. Right now in the European Commission, we are coming up with a brand new system to demonstrate what is green. How do we work with producers to ensure that they get a green tick from investors and more investment going into their green production processes? So why the fashion industry? Well, you've heard the importance of the fashion industry. And we have here some very important players, both Robert, who is actually looking at materials, and also Roberto, that's on the other end, trying to purchase those materials from Burberry. And so I want to focus on circularity, but within this holistic scope of what is your role in the circularity spectrum. What are the key actors that you see? What are the messages that you're getting from the Gretas, from our house is on fire, from the emergency? And how do we bring this to scale from a materials perspective? And then we'll talk about within the production of the new products as well, and then move into the role of the policymaker to give the right signals. Robert.
Thank you very much. I joined Lenzing in 2014 with a very clear vision. And the vision was really that one day recycling in textiles will be as normal as we know from the paper industry today. I came in with a technical approach, but also when I then listened to the young ladies that were here this morning, I just feel the emotions and the passion. And that is exactly the kind of culture change we're bringing within Lenzing, but it's also the passion that we want to bring to our partners. So what we did is we took in 2014 a project that we call TREAT, the Textile Recycle Initiative. It took years to develop, but it resulted in a technology we call Refibra. The circular economy is absolutely critical because all our fibers are based on wood, so they're completely bio-based as well as biodegradable. So we are part already of this, the biological cycle of the circular economy. There's a good basis for the company, but the wood can be blended with other kinds of wood. So what we did is we took the pre-consumer cotton waste. When you cut a garment, you have a certain cotton that is left. We can turn it back into a cellulosic wood, and then we blend it into fiber. So we are very proud to have the first circular economy in the textile industry product at a commercial scale.
And is it niche or is it really commercial? I mean, who's buying this? And do you have enough
customers? It's definitely, unfortunately, niche. We are facing a lot of barriers, and that is, I think, the good thing about this first initiative. It's niche, it's more expensive, it's quite cumbersome process, it's still manual. If you realize, for instance, let's take the cost of a jeans, FOB works be $10. At this moment, this incremental cost, if I take a regular tensile fiber or take a tensile with Refibra, the cost of the jeans will increase by 40 cents. That is way too much for the consumers, way too much for the brands and retailers. So the technology exists, it is commercially available, but we're definitely not hitting the targets that we had anticipated.
And do you need more finance in order to bring the cost down? Do you need costing externalities? What would help you?
What we need are different things. We're facing barriers. For instance, if you want to import waste from certain countries, waste is considered by legislation sometimes as a product that cannot be exported. You need to keep the waste into your country. That means we need to help legislation, or the help from legislation, to make sure that waste actually can be classified as raw material again. So that, I think, is going to help us. The other thing that we need really is indeed economies of scale. Now, we cannot push it, but we can, as a fiber producer, we can really drive the economics down if the demand goes up. So we need the help from the brands and retailers to make sure that they educate the consumer that recycled is not negative. That's some of the feedback we are getting. I don't want to sell recycled clothes because it's cheap. That's the perception of the consumer. So we need brands and retailers to help on that. We need brands and retailers to take a holistic look at the economics. Again, $10, $10.40 for jeans that might be sold somewhere between 40 and 100. So is that 40 cents really a difference? So that, I think, is really what we need. And I think what is also very interesting is we need a completely different view on partnerships. Your customer in a linear economy certainly becomes your supplier. And I think that is something that we need to also not underestimate. The circular economy means we cannot do it alone. We need to work with partners. We need to work with people that have the same value and beliefs. But because only together with partners in the value chain, be it fabric producers, be it brands, retailers, but also with NGOs and governments, we can really make an impact.
And often what we're saying is we need new bedfellows. We need to have new types of partnerships. So I'm going to turn to you, actually, Roberto, because you represent a very iconic brand. And building on this, do you get the same sense with regard to the materials that you yourself would have difficulty in purchasing, actually, some of these materials?
We're part of the same game. So we are saying it, but we're trying to leverage our partnership in order to continue to invest in innovation. Innovation is probably the answer to those challenges, and that's the partnership that we are building together. It's one of the key things. Innovation is a big thing for us in order to provide solutions to all the actions that we are trying to take, and I will make some comment. I will come back on some of those actions. Innovation will provide the solution. So we have an internal innovation team. They are fantastic people, a lot of knowledge, but the main point for them is to act as a connector of knowledge. The innovations will come from everywhere, and we're seeing with the partnership that we have with Lenzing, we're taking it so strong that we have the same name as well. So
it starts with a name,
Exactly.
and it builds from there.
It's alignment. But we're really investing on that, in making sure that we are connecting knowledge from everywhere, because innovation will come from within, but also from outside the industry. So that's one of the key elements.
Your connection of knowledge, you've done some fascinating thing with the youth, so maybe you can reflect a little bit on that, and then you've also looked at disruption, and you've got 50 key disruptors within your business, which I think is fascinating.
Yes. Well, we have an example that I can share, but listening to what the young people were saying before is I was about to say awareness is rising, and it's a good news. It's more and more important. And I think that having listened to them, it's awareness absolutely there. We did an event. We have a yearly innovation event, and during that event, we ran an hackathon event with 35 students. And the idea was, our iconic product is the trench coat. The idea was, give us an idea about the trench coat of the future. So imagine the trench coat of the future. There was no reference whatsoever to sustainability, circularity. It was just open ideas. 100% of the ideas, they all came back with circularity in mind. So a very interesting proposal on circularity. So I think that's a great news, because the energy that we have seen before, the energies that we have seen during the hackathon event is there. They're pushing us, and I think it's a good news, because it's keeping us honest and will facilitate a real, transparent, honest
And if I
conversation.
may maybe just add, because I think circularity, and we've talked about this, has been hijacked a little bit by the waste industry. We need to remember that the link with gender, the link with finance, the link with a systems change it's a holistic approach. So what the youth are saying is we can see what that means in practice, and we're asking you to shift.
And it's absolutely right. It's such an holistic approach, and that I think we all recognize we have a big challenge. We have a big journey ahead of us, but that's why we as a company, and the title is From Commitment to Action, I am proud to say that we really committed, we really moved from commitment to action. At the same time, we need to be modest, humble to say we're learning. There is a long way and we need to learn quite a lot. But even more important then is that we take actions, that we just move and take actions, that we quickly start to experiment and do things. The reference to the 50 disruptions, we have...
Give us a couple of examples of your 50 disruptors.
If I can just add one thing, we are calling them 50 disruption, and why 50 and why disruption, basically? Disruption, because the idea is it's not an action on a linear model, but it's more saying we need to identify actions that are disrupting the model. That should be the value. 50, because we've mapped our value chain and we want to take actions in all the steps with two ideas in mind. One is we need to have an impact, and actions are there to have an impact and to measure the benefit. But the second one, which I think is equally important, is we have a lot to learn. So we believe that quick action and experimenting will help us learn and then go back and take bigger, better, bolder actions. So that's the logic, why 50 and why disruption. If I give you a few examples of that, it's really all along the chain. We can start with a design stage. We have with the Burberry Foundation, we have given a grant of 3 million to Royal College of Art, where there is an initiative called Burberry Future Material Research Group. So we are researching on materials. So we have top people researching on innovative material, which will be sustainable material, and advanced manufacturing practices. This is philanthropic, so this is completely open. It's not, the finding will be public. It's not findings that we will keep for us, for our competitive advantage. It's open, it's out there, it's for everybody. Second initiative, similar but equally important, is an initiative called Future Factory, Future Fashion Factory, which is with the UK government, is UK government-led with the University of Leeds. And the focus is advanced digital technologies and textile together for a more agile supply chain. Agility in supply chain will help us strongly to eliminate, to reduce waste. And then we can continue a partnership with a company called Elvis & Cressy. They take leather offcuts and they create beautiful accessories and home care. In Prato, cashmere is very relevant for us. Wool and cashmere is a big material for us. In Prato, there is a company called Green Line, and they can get excess fabrics or garments, and then basically they regenerate a fiber, which then is used in our finished good production.
Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt you and maybe move to Emmanuelle, and then we'll come back. So hold that thought. Emmanuelle, so the Commission is often criticized for maybe not always being as progressive, because we both live in Brussels and we know how many lobbying groups are there. And do you feel that the voice of these gentlemen who are really going forward and thinking about innovation is being reflected in the circularity legislation that we have, and that the Commission is listening?
Yes, I mean, the circular economy has been really a very powerful concept driver to meet the sustainability goals, for the people, for the planet, for prosperity. And back in 2015, we presented an action plan at European level to close the loop. So how do we transform our European economy from a linear model to a circular model? How do we address the sustainable production, the sustainable consumption, the waste management, and how do we transform the waste to a resource towards circular material? And at the core of the cycle, we have innovation. What we did was to prioritize a number of sectors because they are really impacting a lot the resources. And we have heard the climate change panel, but also the resource panel, saying that we are extracting 3 times more resources than back in the 70s, and that we're basically causing 90% of the biodiversity loss and 50% of the climate change. We have heard also the biodiversity panel saying that we are on the verge of destroying 1 million species out of the 8 million species we have. So the sectors which were identified were, for example, food waste, plastics. So, for example, in plastics, we issued a plastic strategy, which was really a common agenda by the 28 member states, by the European Parliament, and we made it, and next week the ministers will rubber stamp the single-use plastics directive. Well, already there we could see the impact of textile in the release of microplastics into the environment. So again, this circular economy agenda has been powerful. We had 54 actions which were completed, and now we are looking at the next political cycle. European Parliament elections are taking place at the end of the month. A new European Commission will be appointed.
And let's hope it'll be a progressive.
And we will have to, to define the next step towards a sustainable Europe and maybe towards a new circular economy action plan.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And you actually, I want people to listen to what Emmanuelle has just said and to think a little bit about it, because the European Commission is the first institution in the entire globe who has declared that some of its governance will now be looking at people, planet, and prosperity, which is a term which came out of one of our members from the Club of Rome, Kate Rayworth, when she looked at donut economics. And I think this is fundamental, and we should be proud. And although I have an American accent, I'm Belgian-French, by the way. We should be proud in Europe, and I know there are many different nationalities, and we're working with the Chinese, and Europe is working with the Indians and many others, to think about how we bring into our circular thinking, again, moving away from just waste management, into a holistic approach, which brings in people, planet, and prosperity, because that is the essence of well-being. And so coming to that point, and also thinking about these high-level panels that you've also spoken about, that the European Commission has put together, working with business, do you think that within the fashion industry, and we've talked for the last 2 days around the importance of the role of the fashion industry, not only in terms of your polluting impacts and your footprint, but also your link directly with the customer, with behavioral change, your star factor. The fashion industry is fundamental in being able to shift. So working with policymakers, what do you think needs to change in order to give you the signals that you need, and the consumer the signal, in order to really scale all of this up? Because I don't want you to be niche next year.
No, that is exactly, I think, where we have the same vision. We are at the beginning, I think, of a journey. The current experiment that we're doing, the current partnerships that we're having, for instance, also with Burberry, it's just the beginning of much more to come. But we need, at this moment, the role of the government to really accelerate that change. I think we are facing a lot of barriers in our journey at this moment to go to the circular economy. We're talking about imports with a complete lack of transparency. For instance, we are now already in the next generation of trying to come up with recycled garments. One of the biggest challenges we're facing.
Which has a lot of embodied carbon as well.
Absolutely. But at the chemicals used for the dyeing and finishing are really at this moment a barrier for recycling finished garments. In a global value chain with a lack of transparency, how can we make sure that when we are in our production processes integrate finished garments, that they actually are containing the garments that are being reported to be in there? That kind of transparency is needed. The whole consumer aspect, very, very critical.
Okay.
The EU can help with a shift in the consumer's mind. So there are quite a few opportunities, and I think this kind of collaboration of government, brands, and also fiber producers is the only way how we can make this actually successful.
I just add into that, I think collaboration is essential, and the example that we're giving and what we're doing with our partner is an example. But I just want to add one thing. Yes, we all need to play our game, and we need to be part of the solution, but there is a lot that we can start doing. So I think the key message is move to actions, learn from the actions and move on. We took in September, one thing that maybe the beginning of our actions towards circularity in September 2018, actually the first luxury brand, we committed to stop the destruction of unsellable product. That has been a big commitment. We could do it because in the actions that we were taking, we've been working for a number of years on programs on social and environmental responsibilities. So we had a kind of a platform to then take this commitment, which is a challenge and is you know, giving us the challenge to find the solution. But I think the key point, yes, we all need to play a role, but there is a lot that we can do. So start and learn.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, too, is because we're going to talk a little bit, well, I know there's the manifesto on circularity and the circular economy. Your role as well is to talk to your peers, and that's one thing that Paul Polman does so well. Having worked with Paul, I think we all have agreed that we need to clone Paul. And cloning Paul means we need more of your CEOs and other CEOs calling for the same thing, because it can't just be Paul, and Paul will be the first to admit that. And that is what has to happen as well. So there needs to be a push within the CEO shareholder community, which is really talking to each other and saying, we need to think about urgency and how do we scale this up. Emmanuelle, what do you think is the role now of the policymaker in terms of taking this one step forward?
I think it's really, you know, to identify a lot of the facts, a lot of the cooperation, the willingness from the industry to move, also looking at the potential for circularity, both in the clothing industry, but also for home textile and technical textile. And again, if we look at some of the figures, that could be really a great potential for circularity. In Europe, what we see is that we are using recycled materials only at 1% level in, you know, the new clothes which are being used. That we are collecting less than 25% of the clothes. This will change because now there is a new requirement to have separate collection by 2025, so we need to hurry up.
We need to go pretty fast. And as Gutierrez said very clearly, I mean, Secretary General of the UN, not only is our house burning, he basically said to all the countries, this is collective suicide if we don't do something in the next 10 years. So our role in all the industries is to ensure that we really shift now. Otherwise, we have a series of stranded assets and we won't meet our climate neutrality goals. We've put forward at the Club of Rome a climate emergency plan that also calls on circularity and materials as being core, as well as the phase out of fossil fuels, etc. There are many actions that need to go forward. And I'd like to commend the two of you for being thought leaders and performers in this area. Next year, bring more of your peers with you. That would be the #1 call. And let's make sure that this manifesto is no longer just a manifesto. Let's turn it into an emergency plan. Let's actually ensure that we have core actions, working with the policymakers, and I'm sure Emmanuelle will take your great case studies and work back to the Commission, and maybe we can set up a fashion high-level group, Emmanuelle, within the Commission to really unpack some of the core barriers you're talking about, Robert, around the sanctions, around the tariffs, around the dumping of materials, so that we can really protect those companies that are moving forward at a much faster pace. So I'm getting my time's up. So the time's up. We've just tried to give you a little bit of a flavor of what circularity is all about in 23 minutes. And hopefully you'll all be partners in this very, very important, urgent aim. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.